Hey guys, welcome back to Calit's River Restoration. This is Sarah, and I'm going to walk you through how I refinished this desk for a client of mine. Now, I found this desk on the side of a road. I'm pretty sure it was just going to rot, and I decided that it needed some love. So I brought that desk home, and my client reached out to me and said that she was in need of a desk for her sewing machine. So I was like, I got just the one, and here it is. So what I wanted to do is go ahead and get all of that veneer off the top. And as it turns out, it was pretty difficult. I would say not easy at all. On the bright side, it was pretty warm outside, so the warmth from the sun kind of helped to loosen it up a little bit, but there was a lot of scraping. So much scraping that even my husband decided that he could take a swing at it and that perhaps do a better job. And then my son came over and was like, hey, well, maybe I could get it off. And he tried a little bit. They did their best. And then I got it off the rest of the way by myself, still using the same method. I just went out there on a hot day and scraped away. Unfortunately, while I was scraping, I got some gouges in the wood, and not really a big deal. I knew I was going to go ahead and do a whitewash on it. So I went ahead and went over those gouges with this plastic wood filler that is made in the same grain as the wood that I'm using. I say grain, it's more of the same tone, same color, but it is tintable or paintable or stainable. So I'm just doing a whitewash, it'll blend in, not a big deal. So I filled that up. Then I took out all of the drawers so that I could go ahead and I want to sand them because I want to do wood and also black to give it kind of that two-toned look. So after everything dried, I went ahead and I used my 220 grit sandpaper on an orbital sander, and I sanded that out until smooth. I went ahead and wore a respiratory mask to, keep my lungs healthy because I want to live. And I also went over the front of all of the drawers with that 220 grit. I say all of the drawers, really, I went over the front of the 3 top drawers because I'm going to paint the bottom 2 drawers. More will be revealed, stay tuned. I'm just sort of fumbling through this. I haven't put out a video in so long, but I've been holding on to this footage and I've refinished so many pieces since this. So I'm backtracking here and trying to get back in the groove of things now that my kids are back in school. It's a whole ordeal. While I am refinishing the desk, I'm also refinishing a stool so that she has a seat to sit on while she is doing sewing, because she owns a little small business where she does some sewing and she's making graphic tees. So I'm making her a little workspace, and I'm super excited to work on this for her. It's a privilege. So for this, it was actually a chair with a back on it, as you can see and tell by looking at it. However, I don't have the back and I'm not repairing it, so I'm just going to go ahead and repurpose it. I am going to fill up that hole on the side and run a rope through the back, but first I'm going to go ahead and get it all down to bare wood so that I can match it up with the top of the desk. And I used the same grit of sandpaper and just lightly went over everything. See, I say I did 220. I honestly sometimes like to start off with a 150 and then go up to a 220. A 150 is grittier than a 220, and then I use the 220 to sand it out. So while I was saying I did a 220, it is likely that in order to cut through the first layer of finish, I did a 150. But honestly, this was months ago. I did this at the beginning of summer, and it's just been so busy that I haven't been putting out my videos like I intend to. But I will do my best to keep up with it, and here we are. I also had some areas to fill on the sides. What's really cool about that wood filler is that it dries super fast. So once you put it on there, you can go back to it and in about an hour and it's dry and ready to be sanded. Depending on how thick you do it, because sometimes in areas where I've had to put a thicker amount, I'll let it sit overnight before I come back to it, and sometimes even have to reapply after that. I used the wood filler to fill up the hole and also some glue to clamp the crack that you can see in the video. There's a crack in the back of the chair, or this now stool, and I used glue to stick that together, clamped it up, and then I'm going to use that same wood filler to fill up that hole. I actually took a piece of tape and put it on the bottom so that the wood filler wouldn't fall through, and then I just kind of kept sticking it in there. Like, this is one of those situations where I was talking about, and where it gets kind of thick and it takes a little longer to dry. This was one of those areas where it was a bit thick and took a little longer to dry, but no big deal. It does dry. I filled it up. It blended in with the rest of it. And again, it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. The fact that these pieces of furniture are used and have history is almost what makes them cool and unique. I did go over the top one more time to make sure that I had all of the gouges from ripping off that veneer overlay off, and then again went over it with a 220 to get it really nice and smooth before I put my whitewash on. And keep in mind that the whitewash is mixed with water, so it might make the wood swell a little bit. So after I whitewash it, I might sand it again. I don't even remember what I did, but we will see as we watch this video together, and I try my very best to narrate it to you and explain to you what's going on. It looks like it's all dry, so I took off that clamp and now I'm giving it a good sand so that the chair is nice and smooth, and so that you can't tell where I had glued it or also puttied it. When I was puttying it, I also kind of took some of that putty to like work it into the cracks, so it was a nice smooth finish. After I'm done sanding, obviously I vacuum because I need to have a clean workspace because I'm going to paint. I'm also going to whitewash, and yeah, keep watching. Things are happening. Lots of cleaning going on. When I did my whitewash, I did 2 parts water with 1 part drop cloth by Dixie Belle. Then I just mixed it up inside of a mason jar, one of those little mini ones, and painted on. I painted on the whole thing using a Woodster angle brush, and once it's all completely saturated with that, I wipe the paint away with a clean rag. I said that I painted on the whole thing, but what I mean is that I'm actually just going to paint it on the top, because the top is where I'm doing my whitewash. See, this is where I use my clean rag. I'm also working in the same direction as the wood grain so that it has kind of a natural flow to it. I'm gonna do a whitewash on the top 3 drawers also to kind of tie them in. I'm just a huge fan of that light wood with the black right now, or any color for that matter. Natural wood or whitewashed wood, I am just super down with that look right now. So that's what I'm kind of doing with this piece. I want to keep the wood light. I want to do a 2-tone with black. So I just am super stoked to do that 2-tone kind of block effect. So what I'm doing is I'm doing a whitewash on the 3 top drawers, the whitewash on the top of the desk, and also a whitewash on the top of the stool, but then I'm going to paint the rest of it black. And I use the exact same technique when I'm doing that whitewash on everything. I go with the wood grain, I use my brush to put it on, then I use my clean rag to wipe it off. I'm so fortunate to work with clients like this one that I'm doing this project for, because she's so trusting and easygoing and just believes in what I'm doing. So I'm just incredibly grateful, and shout out to my clients and people who trust in me and believe in me and like just let me kind of create and trust my vision and go with what feels right for that piece, because every piece is so individual and what's right for one piece might not be right for another. So there's a lot of learning and growing and mistakes and trial and error that goes along with what I do. And I'm just so grateful for the people who have invested in me and given me the opportunity to grow and to work for them. This was a really fun piece to work on. whitewashed and wiped down, it's time to remove all of the hardware from the other drawers so that I can go ahead and continue progress by painting everything. I like to take the drawers out and get it all nice and clean before I paint. That is part of the prep work. Cleaning it's a whole thing. In fact, it's probably my least favorite part of the whole process. The cleaning and prep is just a nightmare sometimes. In fact, I've got a piece that I've been putting off right now that is smoke stained, and I know that it just needs to be completely scrubbed down, bleached, and kills. And I have this vision of it in my mind, but this whole process is going to be a nightmare for this next piece I'm working on. This one wasn't so bad, didn't have any smoke stain. I mean, it was dirty because it's old and it's sat out, but otherwise it was fairly easy to wipe down and get nice and clean before I started my paint. The cleaner that I'm using is a mixture of Dawn dish soap, white distilled vinegar, and water. I just do half vinegar, half water, and then a squirt of Dawn dish soap, and that's what I use a lot of times to clean things. I did, in fact, go over the top with a 220 grit to soften it up a little bit, because sometimes when you're doing a whitewash over bare wood like that, the wood will swell a little bit, as wood does, because it is a porous material. So I sanded it down a little bit to get it a little bit smoother where I had whitewashed it. And again, when you do that sanding, you have to clean it because it needs to be clean when you paint. I used the Dixie Belle black mineral paint on the rest of it. Not the top, not the whitewash drawers, nowhere where I whitewashed it all. But everything that is not whitewashed is going to be painted with this black paint. It is called Caviar by Dixie Belle. I like the coverage of it. It's pretty easy to work with. I did end up taping off the side of the drawers because I wanted to give them a little modern flair with a little straight edge triangle vibe, and that is what I did. So I did that, and then I painted the sides of the drawers as well, making sure that I've got that tape nice and secure and flattened down so that I don't have any bleed through. I did that on only the black drawers, I believe. I only did the black drawers that way. In fact, I'm positive I did. I only did the black drawers. I did not do the white drawers with the black on them. I feel like I need to apologize for my appearance in this. I know that it was summertime or the beginning of summer, and I think that I might have let myself go a little bit. I just feel like I look like a hot mess, but whatever. At least the furniture is going to look good, right? Sometimes that's the way it goes. Sometimes I don't look great, but I'm making something beautiful. Whatever. It is what it is. I showed up that day, and that's sometimes as good as I can do. I'm not exactly sure why I have my shirt pulled up and I'm looking like Homer Simpson, but you know, some days are just like that. What's great is I work from home, so if I want to show up to work looking like a slob, I have that right. I'll just show up to work looking like a slob, because as it turns out, my clients don't really care how I look while I'm working on the piece. They just care how the piece looks when I'm done with it. So that's all I'm going to say about that. No more apology from me. I am going to talk about the paint, and the paint goes on pretty thick, and the longer this paint sits out, the thicker it gets. So sometimes you have to add a little bit of water to it, and that's kind of cool because the paint, I feel like the coverage is pretty good, but it also lasts quite a bit, and I feel like you can stretch it out, especially since you can add a little bit of water as it gets thicker. And I kind of like paint to be a little bit thicker. I think that when the paint is a little thicker, it has a little bit of a better coverage. I used a chalk brush to apply this paint onto the desk. I did a chalk brush all the way through, except for I will end up pulling out a small painter's brush to do some work around the top to really get it cut in, because the angles were so tight and this brush is not going to do the trick for that. When I paint drawers, especially drawers that set inside a little bit, I like to paint inside of the drawer space a little bit, like that groove where it sets in, so that when the drawer is pushed all the way in, it still has a finished look and you don't have like unfinished wood showing through. So that's kind of important, and that's something that I've learned over time, like as I finish a piece and then put the drawer in and then realize that when I put it in, it kind of sits in a little bit. and then I can see the unfinished wood, and then it looks like an unfinished piece, and then I've got to take the drawer back out and repaint the inside so that it all looks finished and polished. So what I've learned is to really pay attention to those drawers so that when I'm painting it, I don't have to take the drawer back out and paint it again. I just know that I need to paint that inside a little bit so that the drawer can sit in and still look finished. Ramble, 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 ramble. If you've even watched this far, thank you for bearing with me. I'm gonna use that same paint, same technique, same brush on the base of that stool so that it all looks like it goes together. Or at least that's it, that it goes together. They don't have to be a perfect match. In fact, I've noticed that a lot of times when I want a room to look kind of eclectic or like pieced together, you want it to go. It doesn't have to be matchy, it just has to go and vibe. And I think that once I get this sort of painted to complement each other, that I think that they really do complement each other well, and they vibe just fine. I tried using a pointed painter's brush to touch up or to cut in along that edge on the top, but it did not give me the amount of control that I needed. So I went back and I got a small artist brush that is angled, and I used that to do all the cutting in at the top, and that really did the trick. It gave me the control I needed and the precise line, because that's what I needed, was a very sharp, precise, clean line. So sometimes it takes a while and it's a whole ordeal, but that's what it takes sometimes to get that sharp, clean, precise line, is a little tiny paintbrush, and you just work your way through it a little bit at a time. At least that's what I do. I'm sure there are other techniques. Someone out there probably has a better way of doing things. This is just the way that I'm doing it right now, and it's working for me so far. Things will change. I will evolve. I'm just doing the best I can here. Of stuff to say there. I decided to go over the drawers one more time to give them a little bit more of a whitewash, because I felt like the top came out lighter than the drawers. What I've noticed and what everybody else has noticed is that obviously different woods, different surfaces take to products differently. So the tops of these, or the faces of these drawers, are a completely different material than the top of this desk. So it took differently. The top of the desk was lighter than the faces of the drawers, so I did another whitewash just to lighten them up a little more so that they looked like they went together. I used Best Dang Wax in a grunge gray on the top of this desk, and when I first started putting it on, I'm gonna tell you the honest to God truth, my butthole puckered just a hair, because I was a little nervous about that gray and nervous that it wasn't going to go on well. And I wanted it to look like aged wood, and I wanted it to look pretty, but I was a little nervous when I started putting that gray on there and the way that it was taking. I can tell you that all turned out well. I'm stoked with how it turned out. I had to really work it in, and it all came together. But when I first put that first swipe of that grunge gray on, I was feeling pretty nervous. A little goes a very long way, and I'm using a wax brush. What's really cool about this wax product by Dixie Belle is that if I absolutely hated it, I could wash it off with water, because it is water soluble. Like, for example, like let's say I put on a black wax or this gray wax and it's too dark, it will wash off with water. I can also paint over it if I want to, which is really cool because I prefer not to have to paint over my finishes, but it's not unheard of that someday this might get painted or something else might get painted and I've waxed it. So it will help to preserve the life of the paint, but also it's not undoable. I don't have to like try to strip off the wax. I can paint over it if I needed to. Don't need to. Happy with how it turned out. I used that grunge gray on the seat, and I'm also going to use the grunge gray on the front of on the front of the whitewashed drawers to give it kind of a weathered wood look. After I went over everything with the grunge gray, I went over everything with the clear Dixie Belle wax. Well, when I say I went over everything, I went over all of the black with the clear Dixie Belle wax to get it sealed. What's cool about Dixie Belle wax is I guess you don't actually have to seal it. I have never not sealed it because I am just a firm believer in sealing my products. But I do seal this, but I have read that you don't have to seal the Dixie Belle product if you don't want to. I just like to do that. So I guess not only did I go over the whole black area, but I also went over the top with that clear wax as well, just to give it a little extra seal, a little extra durability. And also I think that when I put that clear wax over the gray, it also helped to soften up the gray a little bit and blend it all together a little bit as well. Okay, allow me to backtrack a little bit and correct myself. Number one, I only put the grunge gray on the areas that I whitewashed. I did not go over the entire thing with the grunge gray. Number two, you don't have to seal Dixie Belle paint, not Dixie Belle wax. Dixie Belle wax is a seal. I'm just saying a lot of things. I have soccer coach, soccer mom brain. And I'm not sure if all my videos are going to be this way, but I'm just going to go ahead and allow myself to make mistakes and not spend a million hours trying to edit and re-edit everything that I say. I don't have time for that. I'm going to do my best to share the information with you that I have, but sometimes it's going to be jumbled. Sometimes I'm going to repeat myself because I'm just not a perfect person. I'm just going to do the best I can. So as you can see, I am using that clear wax. I put a little bit too much on in that first swipe. I can see that now as I'm going. It would be wise for me to, of course, yes, use that clean rag to wipe that off. But also, when you put too much of a swipe like that, you can also start peeling the paint off. So lightly, less is more. Just a small amount of wax on your wax brush and work it in. And you don't have to like grind it in, but you want it to be, it's like I've heard other artists say, you almost work it in like lotion. You're just working it into the product so that it will provide a nice coat of sealant so that it's got the durability so that it will last for our client.
Mama.
As you can hear, my son is making a guest appearance, and Johnny Lee, there is soap in the bathtub in a brown bottle. You should be able to find some soap there for you. Anyways, what I like to do when I'm using wax is I go up and down, and then I'll use like a circular motion, and then I'll go up and down again to try to just keep everything going the same direction. That's how I prefer to do it. I know there are other techniques, but that's just how I do it. And then I use a clean rag to wipe off that excess. I'm using a wax brush that I got off of Amazon, and that is not the soap I'm talking about. That is Bubble Bath. So you're going to want to use the J. Crew soap. Excuse me. This smells a lot better. Make sure it's all rinsed out. All right, good job. So clear wax all over with a wax brush, wiping off the excess. And you're gonna do that everywhere, all over every bit, all over the black, all over the white, and you're just gonna work that in to the best of your ability, wiping off the excess, and call her good. You wanna make sure that your paint is 100% dry before you do this. This paint dries pretty quick, but I would still recommend giving it a couple hours to dry completely, or honestly, maybe even 24 hours to cure completely before you go ahead and put this wax on, because earlier I said, oh, well, you don't want to peel the paint off. It doesn't really peel the paint off. It's not like a peeling situation. It's more like it rubs it off. You can rub it off with your wax brush if you're being, one, too vigorous, or two, if the paint hasn't 100% dried. So make sure your paint is completely dry before you do this. This paint is completely dry and I didn't have issues, so all is well. But I have learned from experience, because sometimes I can get a little impatient, and waiting for paint to dry can be frustrating when you just want to move on with your product or move on with your project. When you want to move on with your project, but just sit down, relax, allow the paint to dry, and move on from there. Making more work for yourself because you're rushing it is not going to help you in the long run. In fact, it's going to cause you to have to learn a lot of new tips and tricks on how to touch things up and make things blend if you mess it up. Here is a guest appearance from my son Peter. He's leaning over to give me a hug and a kiss because he loves me and I love him too. And I didn't cut it out because I just feel super fortunate to have children in my life that love me so much. I am a blessed mama. This is one of my favorite and least favorite parts of every project, is when it all starts coming together and you feel like you're finally in the end zone. But this is also where things like go wrong, where I like have to touch something up, or something doesn't quite line up, or maybe like I have a super hard time with putting in the hardware. And fortunately, my husband is so awesome and supportive, and he jumps right in there and helps me out every chance he can get to make it easier. So I did end up lining all the drawers, and there was minimal touch-ups. I did end up having to shorten the legs after I got it all done, and I was so worried it wouldn't fit, but she's a lot shorter than I am, so it all worked out fine. But as you can see, it went together nicely. I used the original hardware that was on it when I picked it up, and I felt like it all went together so well. I lined all the drawers with this rad cow print paper, and I am so stoked on it. I have a whole roll of it, and I'm gonna line everything else with it too. I put a rope around the stool so that it's easy to pull out, and that's it. Like and subscribe, and come back if you want some more of this.